The grand ballroom of the New York Charity Gala was bathed in golden light, its towering chandeliers casting a soft glow over the sea of elegantly dressed guests. The hum of polite conversation, the clinking of champagne glasses, and the delicate notes of a live string quartet created a perfect illusion of sophistication and serenity. This was not just another night of philanthropy. It was a gathering of power, where fortunes, influence, and reputations collided beneath the guise of goodwill. High society figures, media elites, and powerful donors moved seamlessly through the room, exchanging pleasantries, their polished laughter echoing under the vaulted ceiling. The air carried a distinct energy, a subtle yet unmistakable tension, as if everyone sensed something extraordinary was about to unfold. At the heart of the evening stood Melania Trump, a vision of grace in a midnight blue gown, effortlessly commanding attention as she glided toward the stage. Though the political storms surrounding her husband raged beyond these walls, she had always remained above them, an enigma of poise and restraint. Tonight, as the guest of honor, she was here for one purpose: to speak about children's education and humanitarian aid. The moment she stepped onto the stage, a hush fell over the ballroom. Melania spoke with quiet confidence, her Slovenian accent adding a unique elegance to her words, each syllable carefully measured, each phrase carrying the weight of sincerity. She spoke of hope, of progress, of the power of giving back. The audience listened, captivated, nodding approvingly, some even exchanging looks of admiration. But in the shadows, a different kind of anticipation was brewing. Near the front of the room, standing with an air of calculated ease, was David Calloway, a seasoned political journalist known for his sharp, unapologetic attacks on conservatives. He had built a reputation not just on reporting but on dismantling public figures, using his words like surgical instruments, cutting deep and leaving scars that lingered long after his interviews ended. And tonight, he had a target. His eyes were locked onto Melania, his fingers wrapped tightly around the microphone he held at his side. He wasn't here for the cause. He wasn't here for the children. He was here for the headline. As Melania neared the conclusion of her speech, a flicker of a smirk played at the corner of Calloway's lips. He knew when to strike. Timing was everything. The second she finished her final sentence, just as a polite applause began to ripple through the audience, his voice sliced through the air like a blade. "Mrs. Trump," he called out, sharp and deliberate. "How does it feel to be complicit in your husband's agenda?" The words hit the room like a shockwave. The applause died instantly. A ripple of unease moved through the crowd. A few guests shifted in their seats, some glancing nervously at each other. Others, particularly members of the press, leaned in, sensing the makings of a viral moment. Melania's poised expression didn't falter, but for the first time that evening she hesitated, just slightly. The pause was almost imperceptible, but Calloway caught it, and he pounced. "Your husband has been accused of dividing this country, of fostering hate," he pressed on, his voice gaining strength now that all eyes were on him. "And yet, here you stand, playing the role of a role model. Don't you think the real role models are the ones fighting against him?" A sharp silence swallowed the room. Some guests held their breath, already anticipating the uncomfortable exchange that was about to unfold. Others, the ones who lived for spectacle, smirked knowingly, eager to watch how this confrontation would play out. But before Melania could even draw a breath to respond, a new voice cut through the silence. Firm, unwavering, unexpected. "That's enough." All heads turned. Stepping forward from the audience, his presence commanding yet effortless, was Baron Trump. But this was not the boy the world once knew, the quiet, reserved child who had been shielded from the relentless glare of the public eye. He was taller now, his frame strong, his posture unshaken. The youthful innocence that once defined him had been replaced by something else. Confidence, purpose, a quiet but undeniable power. And tonight, he was not going to let anyone humiliate his mother. As he moved past the tables, the energy in the room shifted. The tension was no longer suffocating. It was charged, crackling like electricity before a storm. For the first time, Calloway hesitated. He had prepared to take down Melania. He had expected awkwardness, hesitation, maybe even silence. But this he hadn't seen coming. And as Baron Trump stepped onto the stage, placing himself between his mother and the journalist, one thing became glaringly clear. This night was no longer about Melania Trump. This night belonged to Barron. A ripple of shock coursed through the ballroom as all eyes fixated on Barron Trump. The once overlooked youngest Trump now stood center stage, his tall frame rigid, his expression unreadable. Across the room, David Calloway adjusted his stance, gripping the microphone a little tighter. He had expected pushback, but from Melania, not from her son. The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken tension. And then Barron spoke. "You can ask tough questions," he said, his voice calm, steady, unshaken. "But what you're doing right now, this isn't journalism. This is bullying." The words hung in the air like a live wire, crackling with an energy no one had anticipated. A murmur rippled through the audience, some exchanging looks, others leaning forward, intrigued. Calloway arched an eyebrow, a smirk tugging at the corners of his lips. He had built his career dismantling public figures, reducing them to headlines, twisting their words into narratives that suited him. But this was different. This was new. Still, he wasn't about to let a 17-year-old steal his moment. "Oh," Calloway said, chuckling lightly, trying to mask his unease. "And I suppose you, Trump's son, are going to lecture me on media ethics?" A few nervous chuckles flickered through the crowd. The tension in the air was shifting, becoming volatile, unpredictable. Barron tilted his head slightly, eyes locked onto Calloway's, sharp and unwavering. "No," he said smoothly. "I'm going to show you what respect looks like." The room stilled. For the first time, Calloway hesitated. The confidence in his smirk faltered, just a flicker, almost imperceptible. But Barron saw it, and he pressed forward. "You could have asked my mother about her work," Barron continued, stepping closer. "You could have asked about the children she's helping tonight, but you didn't." Calloway's lips parted slightly, as if to interject, but Barron didn't give him the chance. "You came here with one goal, to make headlines," he said, his voice unwavering. "You didn't care about this cause. You didn't care about the charity. You wanted a viral clip, a moment you could throw on Twitter for a few thousand likes from people who already agree with you." A hush fell over the room, thicker than before, heavier, suffocating. Calloway opened his mouth, ready to push back, but something was wrong. The energy of the room had shifted. No one was smirking anymore. No one was nodding along with him. Instead, they were watching Barron. And that's when Calloway realized he wasn't in control anymore. For years, he had mastered the art of setting the narrative, of crafting a moment that could be spun into a controversy, of turning his subjects into defensive, stumbling shadows of themselves. But tonight, he was the one being unraveled. Barron took another step closer. He didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. His sheer presence filled the space between them, dominating it with an authority Calloway hadn't anticipated. "Let's make this simple," Barron said, his voice quieter now, more deliberate. "How many people in this room came here tonight to hear about helping children? About education? About giving back?" A few hands went up. Heads nodded. Even those who weren't Trump supporters shifted uncomfortably, acknowledging the truth in his words. Barron's eyes never left Calloway's. "And how many people came here to listen to you make this about yourself?" A sharp, stunned silence. Then, laughter. Not the laughter of mockery, but realization. A few chuckles, then a ripple through the audience. Someone near the back even clapped, just once, but it was enough. Calloway's face darkened. He could feel the moment slipping away from him, his grip on the narrative disintegrating like sand slipping through his fingers. And Barron wasn't done yet. "You wanted a moment, Mr. Calloway?" Barron said, folding his arms. "Well, here it is." More murmurs, more nods. The crowd was with him now. Calloway's fingers tightened around his microphone, his smirk now a rigid line. He needed to regain control, fast. "Mrs. Trump is a public figure," Calloway countered, his voice sharper now, more defensive. "She should expect tough questions." Barron didn't blink. "Then why didn't you ask one?" Another wave of murmurs, another flicker of recognition in the crowd. Calloway inhaled, exhaled, glancing around as if searching for support. But the usual suspects, the other journalists in the room, remained silent. They weren't used to being called out like this. Not by a Trump. And certainly not by a 17-year-old. Behind Barron, Melania Trump stood quietly. She hadn't interrupted, hadn't tried to step in. She didn't need to, because her son was winning. Calloway saw it too. And for the first time in his career, he didn't know how to fight back. His plan had been flawless. Interrupt Melania, create an awkward exchange, turn it into a viral moment that would dominate the news cycle for days. Instead, he had walked straight into a storm he hadn't seen coming. Baron Trump, calm, composed, and entirely in control, had just dismantled him, piece by piece. And as the realization set in, Calloway felt something he never expected to feel in a room like this. Fear. A heavy silence filled the ballroom, the kind that didn't just linger but wrapped itself around every person in the room, suffocating, unrelenting. David Calloway, the once assured journalist, shifted his weight, adjusting the microphone in his grip as if trying to ground himself. This was unfamiliar territory. He was used to leading the attack, to setting the pace, to pushing his subjects into uncomfortable corners until they fumbled, stammered, broke under pressure. But now, he was the one under fire, and the one standing across from him, a 17-year-old he had severely underestimated, wasn't breaking a sweat. Baron Trump stood tall, steady, his posture exuding a quiet, unshakable confidence. He didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to overpower Calloway physically. He was winning in a way far more devastating, by making him irrelevant. Baron tilted his head slightly, his gaze locked on Calloway like a predator assessing its prey. Not with aggression, but with cold, calculated precision. "You claim you're just doing your job," Baron said, voice smooth. "But if your job is about asking the tough questions, why is it that you only ever ask the same ones?" The room stirred. A few guests glanced at each other, recognizing the weight of the question. Calloway let out a small, forced chuckle, attempting to regain his composure. "Well, excuse me if I'm not in the business of sugarcoating reality." Baron didn't flinch. "Reality?" he echoed, his voice carrying across the room with the kind of clarity that demanded attention. "Or a narrative?" Calloway's smirk twitched. The oxygen in the room shifted, the energy now belonging to Baron, not him. "You came here tonight," Baron continued, taking a slow step forward, "not to report, not to ask about the charity, not to cover the work my mother is doing. You came here looking for a viral moment, and now that you realize the moment isn't going the way you planned, you're scrambling." A soft murmur spread through the audience. Even the most skeptical in the room couldn't deny the power shift unfolding before them. Calloway clenched his jaw. He wasn't used to this. To losing. He had prepared to control the narrative, to frame Melania Trump as complicit, detached, a symbol of everything wrong with the administration. Instead, he was the one being framed. Baron took another step closer. "You say my mother should expect tough questions because she's a public figure." He paused, letting the words settle. "Then why didn't you ask about her work tonight? Why didn't you ask about the families she's helped, the children she's fought for?" Calloway opened his mouth, but hesitated, and that hesitation was everything. Because in that second, the entire ballroom saw the truth. He didn't have an answer. He hadn't come prepared to discuss the event. Because he never cared about it in the first place. Baron's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smirk, but held the same weight, a subtle acknowledgement that he had seen through the entire charade. "If you actually cared about what's happening here," Baron said, his voice dangerously smooth, "you'd be asking different questions." The air was thick, charged with an energy that made even the most seasoned journalists in the room shift uncomfortably in their seats. Calloway's confidence was cracking. His usual weapons, his sharp tongue, his well-rehearsed rebuttals, his ability to twist a conversation to suit his angle, none of them were working. And Baron knew it. For the first time that night, Calloway wasn't the one controlling the moment. Baron took another deliberate step closer, and Calloway instinctively stepped back. It was small, barely noticeable, but to those watching, it was monumental. The seasoned journalist, the man who prided himself on breaking public figures, was physically retreating. And that's when the audience knew. This wasn't just a confrontation anymore. It was a dismantling. And Calloway, he was the one being taken apart. For the first time that night, David Calloway felt it. Not irritation, not frustration, panic. The kind that clawed at the edges of his composure, whispering the unsettling truth. He was losing. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He had walked into this ballroom fully in control, armed with the kind of rhetorical ammunition that had taken down public figures before. He had imagined Melania hesitating, fumbling, maybe even walking off in uncomfortable silence. Instead, he was the one unraveling. And Baron Trump? He was the one holding the blade. The silence in the room had changed. Before, it was tense, filled with anticipation, the kind of quiet that lingered before public execution. But now, it was charged, electric, a suffocating atmosphere that didn't spell doom for the Trumps, but for Calloway. Baron stood there, unwavering, unshaken, his presence alone suffocating the last remnants of Calloway's confidence. And then he spoke. "Let's stop pretending." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of finality. This was never about journalism. It was never about asking tough questions. It was about you. Calloway's grip on his microphone tightened, his knuckles turning white. He could feel his control slipping. And Baron knew it. "You didn't come here to challenge my mother," Baron continued, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "You came here to make a spectacle, to create a moment that people would retweet, clip, share, a performance." A few people in the crowd exchanged glances, because deep down, they knew he was right. Calloway knew he was right. Still, he wasn't ready to surrender. Forcing out a hollow chuckle, he folded his arms, adopting a mocking expression, trying to claw back any semblance of authority. "That's quite a speech, Baron. You really are your father's son." The words were meant to be an insult, but they held no weight. Because Baron didn't flinch. Instead, he took another step forward. "And you," he said smoothly, "are exactly what people think you are." Calloway blinked, a second, a fraction of hesitation. But the audience saw it. The unraveling had begun. Baron turned slightly, gesturing toward the crowd, toward the donors, the politicians, the press, all watching with rapt attention. "How many of you actually came here tonight to help children?" he asked, his voice strong, unwavering. A few guests raised their hands. Some nodded, others shifted in their seats, unsure where this was going. Then Baron turned back to Calloway, his expression razor-sharp. "And how many of you came here to watch him make this about himself?" Silence. Then, a ripple of laughter. Not cruel laughter, not mockery. Recognition. The kind of laughter that exposed the uncomfortable truth in the room. Calloway wasn't the journalist in control. He was the distraction. Calloway's jaw tightened. He could feel the narrative slipping through his fingers like sand. His carefully crafted attack had been turned against him, piece by piece, until there was nothing left. He swallowed, adjusting his stance, trying to recover. "Mrs. Trump is a public figure," he snapped, forcing authority back into his voice. "She should expect scrutiny." Baron tilted his head slightly, amused. "Scrutiny?" he echoed. "Or selective outrage?" Calloway's fingers clenched at his sides. "If you really cared about accountability," Baron continued, stepping even closer, "where was your outrage when others stood on this stage before her? Where was your righteous indignation then?" Calloway opened his mouth, but there was no answer. Because there wasn't one, and he knew it. The audience knew it. And the moment he realized that they knew it, he lost. Baron let the silence stretch, let it fill every corner of the ballroom, let it settle in the bones of every person present. Then he delivered the final blow. "You didn't come here tonight to hold power accountable," he said, voice smooth, quiet, but deadly. "You came here because you thought we would break." A heavy pause. "You came here expecting to see weakness." He let the words settle, let them breathe. Then he tilted his chin slightly. "And instead," he gave Calloway a small, almost amused nod. "You became the story." The room erupted, not just with polite applause, not just with murmurs of approval, but with thunderous, undeniable validation. It wasn't about politics anymore. It wasn't about left or right, about who supported Trump and who didn't. It was about the undeniable reality that everyone had just witnessed the impossible. David Calloway, a seasoned journalist, a veteran of the media battlefield, a man who had built his career on controlling the conversation, had been completely, utterly dismantled by a 17-year-old. Calloway stood there, his face red, his breathing shallow, his fingers gripping the microphone like it was the only thing keeping him from collapsing completely. He had nothing left. No retort, no counter, no control. And Baron? He had everything. The applause had a different kind of weight now. It wasn't just polite acknowledgement, it was a verdict. A declaration that the room had shifted, that the power dynamics had been rewritten right in front of their eyes. David Calloway stood frozen, gripping the microphone with the stiffness of a man desperately trying to cling to something, anything that could salvage what was left of his credibility. But there was nothing left to hold on to. The people he once commanded with his words, the crowd that he expected to cheer for his confrontation, had instead turned on him. And standing before him, tall and unshaken, was the one person he had never anticipated would be his downfall. Barron Trump, the boy the world had dismissed, the shadow in the background. Tonight he had stepped forward into the light and rewritten the narrative himself. Barron didn't gloat. He didn't need to. He simply stood there, composed, his eyes locked on Calloway, unwavering. Then from the crowd, someone spoke. Barron's right. The words came from an older man in a tailored suit, his voice steady, carrying the authority of someone who wasn't easily swayed by spectacle. A businessman? Maybe. A donor. Someone used to commanding a room. "This is a charity event," the man continued, looking directly at Calloway. "This isn't the place for political stunts." A ripple of agreement spread through the audience. Heads nodded. Murmurs of approval passed between guests. Even some of the reporters, who had initially expected another easy takedown of a Trump, seemed unwilling to side with Calloway now. And just like that, the final nail had been driven into the coffin. Calloway's jaw clenched. His face burned. He had lost. And not because he had been silenced. Not because someone had shouted over him. But because a 17-year-old had outclassed him in front of the entire room. He had walked in expecting to create a headline. Instead, he had become one. The weight of the moment crushed down on him. And then, slowly, stiffly, Calloway lowered his microphone. And turned away. His walk of shame had begun. The cameras followed his retreat, every step captured, every movement a silent admission of defeat. This wasn't just about a failed ambush. This was a shift in power, a moment that would be remembered. And Barron Trump? He had just cemented his place in history. A new chapter begins. The applause hadn't even faded before Melania stepped forward, her expression calm, unreadable. For a moment, she simply looked at her son. Then, with the same grace she had always carried, she reached out and straightened the lapel of his suit. A small gesture. But it spoke volumes. She didn't need to say anything, because Barron had already said everything that needed to be said. And in that moment, the world saw it. He wasn't just the youngest Trump anymore. He wasn't just the child who had once been a background figure in his father's presidency. Tonight, he had stepped forward, and no one would ever make the mistake of underestimating him again. A lesson for the present, and for us all. As the night came to a close, the energy in the ballroom lingered, charged, changed, permanently altered. People left the event knowing they had witnessed something rare, something real. And it wasn't just about politics. It was about a shift in the way we perceive strength. True power isn't always about who shouts the loudest. It isn't about who has the biggest platform, the most followers, the sharpest insults. It's about control. Control of the moment, control of the narrative, control of yourself. And Barron Trump had mastered all three. What does this mean for the future? Is this the beginning of something greater for Barron Trump? Is this the moment where a new figure emerges, not just as the son of a president, but as a voice of his own? One thing is certain, the world is watching. And after tonight, no one will ever look at Barron Trump the same way again. Now it's your turn. What do you think? Did Barron handle the situation the right way? What would you have done in his place? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next powerful story. Because this is just the beginning. See you in the next one.